going to speak just for a few minutes. I am an emeritus professor at Temple Law School. What that means is I got really old and had to retire. But I taught criminal procedure and civil procedure and evidence for many years. So these are subjects. This subject tonight is one that's close to my heart. And we're going to be joined by Judge ONeill, Judge Steve ONeill, who has a remarkable experience, perfect for this particular evening, because he has been both a state prosecutor in Montgomery County, a defense lawyer, and now a fair number of years been a judge in Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas. So he's been an actor in all three phases of the criminal justice system in Montgomery County. So we're delighted that he's joining us. And he and I lived around the corner from each other for about 30 years. And I hope he doesn't hold that against me. But we're going to be fine. Let me talk a little bit before we get to Judge ONeill and his innovative drug treatment court, which to me is a very important subject, and talk just a little bit, almost a little bit of a civics class about the court system in Pennsylvania, which applies in civil and criminal cases, although our discussion tonight is about criminal cases. There is the lowest level court, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but in the hierarchy of courts is the magisterial district court with district court judges. And you see those in your neighborhoods. Around Montgomery County, there are probably three, not probably within 15 minutes of my home. And that's where people are brought ordinarily for bail hearings after they've been arrested. There may be preliminary hearings, et cetera, et cetera. If it's a less serious case, that is a summary offense or a misdemeanor, that case will actually be tried in the magisterial district court. If it's a more serious case, that is to say a felony, a term I think we've all heard, which carries more serious penalties, those cases are then sent to the Court of Common Pleas, where Judge ONeill sits for trial, sort of the kind of trial we're used to seeing on television in lawyer shows. If somebody is found found guilty in the Court of Common Pleas after a trial, which may be with a jury or without a jury, that person may appeal to the state superior court, which is the first level of appeal, which every Pennsylvanian has a right to. And you get to have your case reviewed for legal errors by the Pennsylvania Superior Court. If again, you are a criminal defendant and you've not gotten any relief from the Superior Court, you may petition the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in order to see if they will exercise their discretion to take your case. The Supreme Court only takes the cases it chooses to hear, and for a variety of reasons. There may be big public issues involved, things that are significant that they would like to decide, but that is discretionary. And if the Supreme Court does not take the petition, accept the petition and hear the case on appeal, then the decision by the Superior Court is final. The sentencing of a criminal defendant would take place, of course, in the Court of Common Pleas by the judge who hears the trial, and that sentencing is done by the Common Pleas judge. And again, that issue would ordinarily terminate the case unless, again, there is an appeal. There are a number of issues we have to be aware of. And of course, first of all, is the right to counsel. And the US Constitution states that anyone who is going to be subjected to a criminal charge for which jail could be imposed has a right to counsel. If you can't afford counsel, then in Montgomery County, you are entitled to a public defender or perhaps a privately appointed lawyer by the court, so that everybody should be attending, being held for trial and hold the trial with the assistance and advice of counsel. The key here is this: the American system is an adversary system. The theory is that by the clash of a defense lawyer and the prosecutor, both doing their best, that the truth will emerge for the jury. And that's a system that goes all the way back, of course, to the 1780s and the Constitution. Just be aware that there are many countries in the world which do not have this kind of a system. I've taught for many years in Italy, which traditionally did not have that kind of a system. They did not have juries. They still only have them in odd cases. where judges decide everything. So the jury system, not unique to the United States, but certainly probably has its full bloom here in the United States. One other point I'll just make for people who obviously are involved and get themselves caught up in the criminal justice system, and I think you're aware of some of these things just from popular culture, and that is that when you are arrested, when a person is arrested, and the officers are intending to interrogate that person, you have a right, you understand the Miranda Rights when the officers have to tell you have a right to counsel, right to remain silent, right to appointed counsel, and of course to tell you that anything you say may be used against you. This is so well known from police shows on TV that I think everybody can probably pretty easily recite them. But the key is, do you actually ask for counsel and get counsel? And remarkably, a large number of people in the United States choose to go on in the system without a lawyer, at least through the interrogation part of the system. I don't think that's wise, but the fact is a majority, a fairly large majority of people decide to handle an interrogation essentially on their own. At trial, of course, almost no one is allowed to go to trial without a lawyer, although people in fact have a constitutional right to represent themselves, although the judges are very, very, very careful to make sure that if a person is going to do that, they are well aware of the rights they are giving up and they are waiving, etc. One further point, and again, we talk here about the trial, and of course, that's what most of us in our popular culture think is the way most cases get resolved, but you have to appreciate that the vast majority of people charged with crimes in America, not only in America, but in other countries as well, plead guilty. And the case is resolved not by a full-scale trial, but by a guilty plea ordinarily negotiated between the defense and the prosecution. Usually, perhaps a lower charge is pled to in exchange for a lower sentence, a variety of arrangements that prosecutors and defense lawyers can make, and then the judge ordinarily will impose the sentence that the parties have agreed on. What's unique about Montgomery County, and the reason we're really proud and happy to have Judge ONeill here today, is that we have in Montgomery County a drug treatment court, which is rather unique. I know in many other cities where I've lived, there's no such thing. And I think it's a real recognition on the part of the county and the court that drugs are special. They're different. There are a tremendous amount of victims and people who are perpetrators, and maybe there's some victims among them as well. And that in fact, these kinds of cases in the appropriate case with the appropriate defendant have to be treated differently. And there is a possibility, of course, of getting somebody off the drugs and rehabilitating and going on with their lives. And I think this court basically recognizes that and tries to create sort of an alternative to the usual kind of a system that I've just described. Judge ONeill, I think, was sitting in that court, using word in quotes because it's done virtually now, up to a few minutes ago, I believe. And so comes fresh from that. And I will tell you, is passionate, I think it's fair to say, about this kind of court treatment and about the availability of it to people in Montgomery County in the hope of not just taking people through the criminal process, but actually trying to help them solve their problems. And I think that's obviously something I think we can all appreciate. So without further ado, let me go to Judge ONeill. I have a number of questions to ask him, which I think will allow him to explain to all of you who are observing and watching how this court works, what's it about, and has it been successful, et cetera. So my first question for the judge is this: why was the court created? I think it goes back to 2006, something like that. Why was it created and how was it created? How did it happen?
Yeah, so thank you very much, David, and all Pennsylvania for Modern Courts for hosting this. I think that's, the way you get information out, the way you share for people that care to come on and really listen to new ideas and new innovations in our court systems. That's kind of what I was dealing with. I was appointed to the bench in 2002 And although having a background in criminal justice, both as a prosecutor, I had noticed in my first few years in the criminal division that I am seeing individuals that are entering into the system with charged with crimes, but what appeared to be behind the crimes was their substance use disorder. Back in that day, we called it addiction. That's been changed. Addiction is a very stigmatizing. Addict is a stigmatizing word. So you just begin to change the language around it. But we began to see that so many of these individuals were people that suffered substance use disorders, verifiable substance use disorders. And then what we were seeing was actually the criminal behavior were symptoms of that. Just like we learned that it was right in the beginning in 2006. I don't know how many of you are watching Dope Sick or read the book Dope Sick, but it was really the beginning back in 2006 of the opioid crisis that has this country in such grips now. I mean, the work of Purdue Pharmaceutical was beginning, and what we were seeing is these were people with a serious opioid use disorder, and the crimes that you were seeing were crimes such as the possession of the drugs, the thefts around the gaining of money for drugs, the driving under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and really learning that alcohol has been treated separately for so long in our society, but it's really just another form of a dangerous substance, just happens to be legal. But these were, cases in which that you began to see that these were people that had diagnosed substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, opioid use disorder, heroin use disorder, cocaine use disorder. And I said, well, why are we busy trying to incarcerate away the problem? Thinking that under an old system, that if we incarcerate somebody away, that they'll just change, when in fact what we were dealing with was a brain disorder, which is now we know, 15 years later, that we are dealing with a brain disorder, if we start as a court system to saying, well, hold it, we know they have this disorder, but we're still going to continue the old system. It wasn't very humane, in my opinion. That why not try to treat the underlying disorder, and perhaps if you do that, you're going to reduce the recidivism. So what I believed is that has to be. So I started to research it, look around, and found out, hey, there are some of these courts in here, and they actually drug courts started back in Miami, Florida, in 1989. I don't know those of my generation that were around, but Janet Reno, if you remember, she was the U.S. attorney, but she was the district attorney in Miami, Florida, back in 1989, and her and a judge named Stanley Goldberg got this idea, which is pretty simple but pretty incredible, which was the idea that, well, if it's a disorder, and treatment is knowing you can work with people if you treat them, and they tend to get better. But the problem is with a use disorder, nobody wants to go to treatment. They'll go to rehab for 21 days, and the whole model was set up to kind of avoid the consequences. But if you kept them in long-term treatment, which was with evidence-based practices, these are things that work, not things that some judge who has a bright light, white light idea like, hey, I know what's best because I'm a judge, and therefore I don't use drugs and you shouldn't use drugs, so I'll incarcerate you until you learn to stop using drugs. Or it's the same as saying, look, I can ride a bike, but you can't. But if I lock you up, you'll learn to ride a bike because you're going to get tired of being locked up. Well, the research says that's absolutely false. It just doesn't work. So I studied these treatment courts to find out, like, hey, there's a few of them out there, and they are working. They are working absolutely quite successful. So in 2006, I started to, take training in it, go to visit other drug courts around the country to learn, like, what do you do? How do the judges operate? I mean, they can't order somebody to just stop using drugs. And how does the justice system begin to work to actually be humane, to actually, to believe in the idea that, there's an absolute value to every human being. And if you look at the people that are before you, you wouldn't do this to people that might have any other chronic, somebody has heart disease or something like that, which are, disease. You wouldn't be inhumane towards them. I just didn't understand. So fortunately, at that time, I was also the county, I had, prior to going on the bench, I was the county solicitor for a couple of years, and I got to know the commissioners. And being in the system, I got to know the stakeholders, we call them. They would be the justice system, the judges, the district attorney, the public defender, and the county commissioners who have to fund it, and saying, look, I have an idea here and I think it can work. And I think it's good for our county, it's good for our courts. And I think we're making a statement into that absolute value of every human being that appears in front of us. And they listened for whatever reasons. I was kind of unique. I didn't have to go running out and trying to get grants and everything like that. They were able to fund it. And I opened my doors with a lot of training under my belt on April 20th of 2006 with one participant. A young woman was a heroin use disordered person who did complete the court. But that's how it got started. It was the idea that there has to be a better way. It has given birth. I know you're focusing on drug courts, but 4 years later, we saw that this whole idea of treatment works in the mental health field. So people that have a mental health disorder, that if we use the court systems to structure treatment on them, they get better. And they tend to not commit the crimes that when their mental health disorders are uncontrolled. It's the same theory with drug treatment. If the underlying process can be changed to how they see themselves in terms of it being a disorder, they can ultimately control it. But what we learned is you can't control it just under the old, which was, hey, I'll go into rehab for 21 days, 30 days. If I have a really good plan, 90 days. What the research was showing me back then was that you might as well send them to Disney World because it'll cost the same, but they'll have a lot more fun and the outcomes will be exactly the same. You will have no, and that these are all, but what happens is when you use that as the overall, a recovery system where inpatient would be the start of someone's recovery, detoxification in some cases, but then inpatient, and then long-term controlled, treatment. That's why we call it a treatment court. And after behavioral health court, then that begat a veterans treatment court. Again, more focusing on a special population as opposed to the crime or just calling anybody in the system a criminal. These are not, these are people with a use disorder that have a criminal problem, not criminals who have substance use disorders. And it's an important distinction to look at it. So, as I explained a little bit more about the program, how could I not do it is what I said to myself. How could I not want to be part of a system of change? And that's how it got started. David, you asked a very good question, but you're muted.
I was just going to say that.
Fortunately, I read lips, so I know what you said.
Are you sure it was a good question?
It's a great question. I bet you it's going to be something like, how does a case get into drug courts?
That was my
It looks good.
remarkable, isn't it?
I'm pretty good at this, all right?
So how does a case get, if you will, I won't say diverted, maybe that's not the right term, but instead of going through the ordinary criminal justice system, find its way to you?
Right. And that's what's important about it. I mean, if you're going to have a system, you go where the people that have the issues are. So, in a criminal justice system, early models of drug court were fashioned because there were many stakeholders, district attorneys, law enforcement were going, what is this? Like you take somebody in and you treat them? Our system is to incarcerate us. So, there was this, you always have this fear that you'd be called a hug-a-thug court. Like, come on now, you don't care about community safety. But what we were learning was that, hey, the community is far safer if in the long term you're treating these individuals than the failed concepts of simply incarcerating them, so that when they're in prison, they get no treatment. When they get out of prison and they're on probation or parole, they're offered treatment, but they're also offered testing and sanctions if they're using. And there wasn't really an understanding of the disorder itself, and more importantly, the recovery process. So what would happen is you'd put somebody out, you'd say go to treatment, they say, what's the last place I want to go? I don't want to start dealing with my issues, and I certainly don't want to be tested by probation and parole, because if I do, I will get put in. So what was happening is, you're just creating this cycle of a substance use disorder in the criminal justice system. So where we find the people for the program are the ones that are part of this cycle, that, they have been in the criminal justice system for a crime related to their substance use disorder, being treated like a criminal, as opposed to saying, well, let's try something else. So we found our early participants in the prison. There was a lot of, like, why don't you just start with somebody who's arrested with a bag of marijuana, let them come into treatment court and avoid having a conviction. Well, that's good. It's nice. It's nice for, people in, maybe suburban communities that, some kid gets busted with a bag of weed, but you have a drug treatment court. But at that stage, what we learned is, no, we need to be treating the high risk, high need individuals. And it's very, you'll hear a lot of the terms that I talk about are all about, behavior modification. That's what a drug treatment court is. So how do we find the people who might be amenable to the behavior modification, and they're in prison? So we found our way quickly to saying that, hey, let's take those who we call high risk, high need. Those are people who have this use disorder that would not do well on a normal track of supervision, because they can't control their disorder. And again, anybody that knows anything about a use disorder knows what I'm talking about. Just say no doesn't work. Parental, spousal, familial anguish and shame doesn't work. It actually works the opposite way. So we found that to start to deal with these people who were in prison, offer them a way out, which is one of the core concepts. You are in effect beginning to coerce change, right? Somebody doesn't really begin to see the light of their use disorder, or really what it's about, until they begin to feel the heat. So you kind of build a program that says, look, under a normal circumstance, the district attorney wants 7 months in jail because you keep coming back for using drugs. You've been back 4 times and they don't know what else to do with you. We'll let you out, but you stay in this program. And it was an amazing, yeah, absolutely. And then the way the program works, it's long-term. It lasts, when I talk a little bit about how the program works, it lasts a minimum of 15 to 24 months. Well, you're going to create change when you do that. So we found, so now once, I start this, back then I was ONeill's druggie court, or the hug-a-thug court, or I don't know, I don't want to deal with this, but if your client has a drug problem, send them to ONeill, they'll find a way. So we get a lot of referrals. People, there are lawyers who have an ethical obligation to actually care about their clients and say, look, I see the problem isn't that, this person keeps getting arrested. The problem is this person can't control, and everything else, and the family's gone, their assets are gone, everything else is gone. I have an ethical obligation to steer him into ONeill's court. So that's kind of how it got going. And started to pick up. We had the best thing going around change. And so people, and then it becomes what we call now institutionalized in a very good way. We became a positive part of the fabric of the criminal justice system, to where, like, I'm the administrative judge now. of all three courts, which are very robust courts of change. The behavioral health court, I now have a capacity for 170 people. The behavioral court has a capacity for 100 people. We're down a little bit now about COVID. Veterans Treatment Court capacity for 50 people. So you're talking about, look, we have a lot of crime and a lot of criminal cases. We're the third largest in the whole Commonwealth. But if you've got to start somewhere and you got to build it from something that works, evidence-based practice. Now, 15 years later, what do we learn? That they, and not me just saying it because I'm a proponent, I mean, this is the most studied intervention in the criminal justice system. And if you think about it, it's very easy to study. A population that didn't have drug court and a population that does. They have the same substance use disorders, and they're in the same system of probation and parole and incarceration. So you can measure. So this isn't just a few studies. This is metadata. This is meta-analysis that clearly demonstrates that there has been nothing more successful in the criminal justice system when dealing with substance use disorder ever. It's so successful. So, I mean, I'll let you get back to the questions, meaning as I describe it, in the end, how you get to, why do we keep them going? Because they are so successful, but how do we measure that success? Not only in the hedonic personal change in the anecdotal parts, but what is it showing us in the system and why they continue to grow? So,
and in fact, there is a team approach, right, Judge?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a group of people, not just lawyers, not just judges, not just prosecutors, involved in, sort of a holistic approach here, as I understand it.
Yeah, and it is more holistic. I mean, we're a treatment court, and our number one priority is all about treatment. It's getting people into and keeping them in treatment long term, because that's what the evidence shows. Don't go what you feel, don't go what you think, don't go what judges are informed by their own emotional baggage and their own life experiences and their own superiority complexes sometimes that they always know best when nobody follows the evidence. Don't look at the evidence. Like, what does the evidence tell you? Well, if you keep a person in treatment for 12 months, they absolutely will improve and get better. They just do. But we don't have a system that was designed for it. So the whole way the program is designed is around the team approach. So a treatment court team, and what I'm saying here, you can walk into a treatment court in Indiana, you'll see the same thing. It's what's known as evidence-based practices, best practices. There are what is known as 10 key components of how treatment courts always have to operate. And if you don't operate that way, don't call yourself a treatment court. It all starts with the team, the collaborative approach of different people that can be involved in the criminal justice system. There's, of course, the judge. There is the public defender or the defense counsel. There is the district attorney. Now, clearly, the DA has to buy in. If they don't buy into it, then you have an old system where you are saying, look, I'm not soft on crime. I'm a tough DA. I'll incarcerate everybody who takes, change out of your car, in the middle of the night, who goes into a Rite Aid and steals, baby formula, because that's the highest return on the market, aftermarket, for selling for drugs. So if you have a tough DA, you don't have it. But fortunately, we have a district attorney that is extremely supportive and saying, we do it because it works. It lowers recidivism. It lowers ultimately those who are incarcerated. So you need them on board. You need, probation department. But the probation department is no longer just a gotcha department in treatment court, like, hey, we detect your behavior is such that you may present a danger to the community. We're going to lock you up. Now these are specialists that they can't be, probation officers in treatment court unless they have, 100 hours of training on what is the disease and disorder, what are the recovery, how does it work? And for a probation officer, they want to be part of it because they're part of change. They're part of making, seeing people go from here to there in improving. So probation has a whole different way that they deal with it. The treatment providers, as I like to say, we serve them. We created a system where we built a box where we set boundaries and we set a whole lot of rules and regulations and saying, look, you don't want to be in jail, come into this and do it. Now, how it works is number one priority is you got to go to treatment. You know, I don't know whether you'll stop using drugs the first week out. Probably not. These people will have serious use disorders that they physically can't stop using drugs. They have developed over years these negative emotional, coping mechanisms that started, like I say, that, substance use starts, when things that should have been happening to children and adolescents that were not happening, or worse yet, things that should not have been happening to them were. And I'm talking about trauma, and I'm talking about, the core roots of a use disorder, so that it's not hard to figure out that if you're 9 and 10 and you're being abused, or your parents have, abandoned you, and, just there's so much conflict in your life that, you don't feel you fit in, and all these things. And suddenly you just feel really bad about yourself, and there's really nowhere to turn, but you turn, and there are a bunch of other people that are your age that look like you, and they're saying, well, I drink, I smoke weed. And you're not dealing with the problem. You're simply at that stage, why a use disorder forms, you are blanking out from it. You are coping by feeling, it almost tricks you, saying, I feel great, man. I love it when I'm high. But you're really feeling less sad, less, so what happens is this disease takes root, and it isn't easy. You can't just say, hey, let's go into rehab, you'll be okay. We get them when they turn 18 in the system, and it's firmly rooted. So the only way to begin to deal with it is treatment. So treatment is such an important part of our team. We are here to support them. Make the client go to treatment. You don't go to treatment. I'll talk a little bit of how we actually work in behavior modifications with incentives and sanctions, but the main thing is to go to treatment. Then go to probation and parole. Try to just transparency, open, honest, so that they learn a trait that they don't have. They never learned how to be honest, because if you were honest, when you were active in your use, something you were going to get stopped from using. You learned to be a cognitive acrobat, where you had to put versions of yourself out there so that you couldn't be detected. Well, you got to begin to trust probation. So we also now have grown over years into community support, peer support. So we think in terms of AA, NA. They're not an active part of the program, but they certainly know people from drug courts when they come into their programs. But there's also, the concept of, spirituality, separation of church and state. So the court has to watch it in that regard. You can't order somebody into AA or NA. So now it has grown up as a lot of, these support communities, peer support communities that are actually supported. So we have one that works directly with us called the Counsel of Southeastern Pennsylvania Practice. So they're part of our team. There's the newest concept is recovery coaches, actually having somebody who trains to be a certified recovery specialist, and they're assigned to this person to help them through their recovery. So the team, we actually have Magellan, who is the large managed care, and that they're at our table. So when we talk about a team, these are people that meet once a week. There's probably maybe 15 team members that we talk about each individual case and where they are, but they're each part of the habilitative, rehabilitative, supervision, justice system. They're all part of it. They're all at the same table. So that's really what the team is about, and the team guides where we go with each of these cases.
You mentioned sanctions and incentives. I think people would probably like to know, how do you make this happen?
Yeah, that's really at the heart and the core. So what we learned is Skinnerian, behavior modification works on humans. It doesn't just work on rats and mice and the like. It works on the human brain. Just like, there's a lot of thought of a substance use disorder actually being a learning disorder. If you think about it, you go, yeah, I can see that. You learn these behaviors, which are to the brain, they're actually working. Remember, if someone that has suffered trauma takes a drug, uses, an opioid to essentially just blank out, to feel euphoria or feel nothing, that's not the problem. That's the solution for when your trauma is triggered. That's the solution. The taking the drug is the solution. So what happens is over time, we can say, go to treatment. We don't just say, how you doing in treatment? Well, our job is to get them to go to treatment. You know, we begin to use things like proximal and distal goals. Sounds very scientific, but maybe those of you that know science, you say, I'm seeing what he's talking about, why some of this stuff works. Meaning that if you come in here and say, look, it cannot be a proximal goal to have that person in your court stop using drugs. When they've used drugs for 15 years, all their negative coping mechanisms set, and then they come in the first week said, don't use drugs. But we determine, hey, we believe in the support we're giving you and in the habilitation, getting you into a recovery house, a halfway house, into treatment. You can go to treatment. We believe you can do that. So that becomes your proximal goal in the beginning. So if that person says, nah, I want to go to work, I'm not going to show up, we go, okay, how about we sanction you? Now, sanction is jail. Jail is your last resort, and it's never more than 24 hours. It's kind of like, hey, you know, we said change this behavior, you didn't. But what you do is you take things away. You work with things, if those of you know Skinnerian, you do things like negative reinforcement, like, hey, you know, you're on a GPS unit because we need to know where you're going. You're hanging around with, you know, knuckleheads and people that you're more likely to use with. But hey, you've been really great for this last month. We're going to take that away from you. That's called negative reinforcement. So it's a, you know, the incentives is really the great part to watch in treatment court. That first and foremost, it's somebody in authority, like a judge, coming down off the bench or sitting there for 3 minutes and talking about this amazing change. Judges should, you know, all judges that serve on treatment courts must be trained in motivational interviewing. It's entirely different. We don't talk to the participants. We listen first, and then we act as, you know, now we actually have the fist behind the velvet glove. They get it. They recognize the court has the authority, but the approaches are different. So when you're incentivizing change, it's incredible. You know, for them, they've never heard great job, or I'm really proud of you, or, you know, this must be so great for your family and everything. So that alone is in the incentive categories. We have much more. We give out gift cards. We knock off fines and costs. So here are fines and costs that they have, but they can earn by, you know, complying with all the things we require. They can earn off their fines and costs. And, you know, it's a phase system. They get, you know, they go through phases, but what's happening is in these phases, if they're 6 months in your court, they're recognizing the change in their life. Mm-hmm. And so the incentives now are actually, you know, self-driven, like, hey, my family has let me back in. My spouse will let me see the kids. The Office of Children and Youth is allowing me my child back in my life. That's an incentive that we look at and go like, you know, okay, that's our normal life. But when you never had it, an incentive can be many things. So you work with the incentive sanctions, and what happens is they know they work. If you try to have a court without them, it doesn't work. And each individual component of treatment court has been studied. Don't do this. Don't have a judge in drug court. They've tried it. Miserable failure. Sadly, they've tried the studies of juvenile drug courts. Don't work as well. Why? The forebrain isn't developed. You know, I shouldn't do this. I should do this. Having the awareness. It's why insurance companies and car rental companies, they don't want to start talking to you till you're 25 when at least developmentally your forebrain is developed. So it is, you're hearing a lot of science. So here I am talking again. So why don't you try another one, and then maybe the questions will help the rest of it.
I know science is a good thing, and it should, and people should be using science-based treatments for all sorts of things. I have to say, listening to this, and I've known you over the years, you really are saving lives, and you and your team, and truly saving lives. And I assume you are, but you ought to be really proud of this.
Well, as we like to say, we build a system. It's the individual that saves their lives. I mean, the other thing that we learned in terms of, you know, if you want to get around to asking me how you gauge the success is, you know, we have to measure success. anecdotally, we've gotten to the point with the opioid overdose crisis that, I think it was Stalin or somebody once said, the death of one person, is a tragedy. It's horrible. But the death of thousands becomes statistics, and we start to become numb of it in this opioid. So anecdotally, we are heavy on opioid use disorders, heroin use disorder, opioid use disorder. It's probably about 65% of the people we have in the program. And we have an offshoot program where we get them out of the jail right away and get them into a program where they come to court, every day of the week, and treatment to get them going. But what we've learned over time is statistically what we have to measure, because we are a court system, is recidivism. So what we have learned is that, if you went into the jail now, about 75 to 80% of the people that are in there have a verifiable, validated substance use disorder. They have it. So there's no reason to doubt why somebody is in a prison. What happens is, okay, how well do you do with them when they're out? If we did nothing with them, about 65% reoffend. Reoffending is a new criminal act or a violation of their probation or parole supervision. That's a pretty high statistic. That's kind of like saying we're failing you. What we've done, in overall studies, but in our court, we have had close to 800 graduates of our program, and we're able to track that now over 15 years of what has happened. Our recidivism rate is about 30%. So we can show that, the one measure, which is recidivism, returning to the system, and jail days, we can show it. Now, what we also know is this program, if it lasts 15 months, costs about $6,000 to treat these people. What we also know is incarceration for a year is about $22,000. So we do know that. So it's got the appeal to say to the stakeholders, like county commissioners, like members of the public, hey, it's saving lives, but it also saves a lot of taxpayer dollars. And it makes you feel better, at least, how you're spending your taxpayer. What's that little pie shape that goes in the criminal justice system? We've just gotten smarter on what we're doing, but we're not even near where we should be. I mean, every judge should have a treatment court docket. We should, make it a priority that we have enough treatment providers that can serve anybody who wants it. So that's where what we're gauging. We can gauge success, and we have the numbers out there. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I think we're into somebody else's questions, but David, that's a good set.
Yeah, are all the judges trained in this, or really only some of them?
Sadly, no. You have to want to do it.
Okay.
And I've been doing it for 16 years. Not a lot of enthusiasm. That's it's almost like, well, ONeill's taking care of it. Right now, there is a Judge Hillis, who was recently elected, has shown great interest, and he will become, I also do behavioral health court. So right now, both those dockets are mine. Judge Todd Eisenberg, a judge from Lower Merion, he does our veterans treatment court. So we do have it, and there is interest, but there needs to be more. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not going to say it.
And I guess my other question for you is, we're now we're in unique times, I will say.
Yeah.
So you keep saying people come into court, but are they coming into court on a regular
Not yet.
basis? Or
Not yet.
Right.
Look, for 14 years, 15 years, that's how we operate. It was a court system. And, it was court. I did it because I didn't want to take away my duties as a judge, hearing criminal cases, doing trials. I'm an active trial judge.
Right.
I handle, big cases. But I would start my court at 5 o'clock at night for those who had to work during the day, or who, couldn't get there until then. So we'd go, and the sheriffs would be there, so the court supported us. And then I also did it Friday afternoons to the people who worked later, and it would come in on Friday afternoon. So we made our court work for them, but it was court. So what happens is, and it didn't look like court. I mean, I clearly was not a judge. You'd say, this is not a judge. This guy's a therapist. He's like a do-gooder. He's what's he doing? But but you get the feel that's what's going on there. The team was in there. COVID breaks, and we didn't know what to do. You couldn't have court. So we then changed the platform. We got started in saying, look, it's not easy. Most people who don't have a lot of money, they're not going to get great bandwidth. I hope that the new infrastructure bill that goes in there, the bandwidth for everyone. So getting them to treat, but we couldn't bring people in. But we were able to make it. It doesn't look much different than what I'm looking at right now. The team would be on there. When the participant would come on, the team would blank their screens, and I could talk to the participant just one-on-one. Any judge that does treatment courts, it's a best practice. You have to spend at least 3 to 5 minutes with each participant. And it all has to be, motivationally interviewed. It has to be change-based, ask questions, listen around change, highlight when they do change. So now what happens is on Zoom, the experience, it's just been incredible for the participant. They say, Judge, this changes everything. I don't feel like I'm in court. There's no sheriffs rattling handcuffs. There's no, 30 other participants sitting behind me, looking at their phone, chewing gum, smirking, smiling. There's no pressure. It's one-on-one. So we're coming out of that now, and probably in 2020 we'll start. But what do we learn? We're going to go hybrid. We learned to build in the virtual as an incentive. Do really, really well, and the judge will see you virtually. Don't have to come drive in. You don't have to wait for your turn. You got it scheduled in there. The judge will see you. So there's many, many really new horizons that we didn't even know was there. I will change what the courtroom looks like completely. I will come down. I will sit. I don't wear robes. The sheriffs, we have the sheriff's department is now trauma informed. They're trauma trained. So they want to change that, change what the courtroom feels like. So we've learned a great deal from the protocols that we had to impose here.
You mentioned something else, Judge. We were talking before about the question of going virtual. And because a lot of this is personal stuff with people who appear before you, I think it's probably nice not to have a gallery of people.
Well, it could be. I mean, if anybody here says, hey, I really like this drug court thing. I'd like to learn more. It is a public court. The Supreme Court, or not the Supreme, the appellate courts determined it was actually George Bush's niece was in a drug court in Florida. And they tried to close it to the public, say, well, she's here, it's open court. Our staffing where we meet with the team, that is not open, and that is not required to be open. But drug court is open court. There's some states, they actually televise it. I think that's kind of creepy. It's more of like a
when you do it virtually, people can tune in. It's a public.
People can tune in. All they got to do is,
okay.
Judge ONeill, how do I watch drug court? We have it there's a couple Villanova law students that come on and watch it. Judge Zucker in Lower Merion, she's an magisterial district justice. She uses it like she might have a younger person that looks like they're having a use disorder. She'll say, hey, I'll hold your case open, but you go, sit in on Judge ONeill's treatment court, and just get a different perspective. And so we have all kinds of people that come in. There's people that want to research it, people want to study it and stuff like that. But it is public court.
All right. Are we supposed to open to questions, Debbie? Is that the plan?
Yeah, that would, if anybody has any questions, I had said to put them in the chat, but if anybody who's in dark, I would like to say, wants to ask the question, we are more than happy to try to answer them. We're not giving any legal advice here, but we will be more than happy to provide information.
I believe Kathy has a question.
Yes, I'd like to know, is it different for veterans, or are treatment options the same?
Great question. And, it is different. So, when you deal with behavioral health court, those that have diagnosed mental health disorders, so you can begin to deal, with the treatment providers that are community-based. So, there are many Montgomery County community-based that in drug treatment court, we contract with providers so that they're more like they're really our team. They're very responsive. When you get to a vet court, now you're talking about how can we deal with the individual? Because an individual in vet court may have substance use disorders, may have mental health use disorders. Many of our participants in both court have co-occurring disorders, meaning both, but what they do is they treat the individual differently. Now, when they have to go to treatment, that is based through the Veterans Administration. We work with Coatesville as our treatment provider. That's a very strong, so their treatment is provided through the VA, but they're very big on mentor support, peer support, and that's run through our vet court program, this vet mentor support. And it's a very, it's a really, it's a great program to be part of, because it's also a way of the criminal justice system saying, to those that served, hey, we care. We care. We honor your service by not just making you, a regular, but we're going to specialize the court. Now, these have grown a great deal because it's just a good court for any justice system to be behind.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Duncan?
I don't see any raised hands, and I believe Debbie asked the one question in the chat about virtually, so I
So
think that might be it.
we're approaching 7 o'clock. What should we
Yeah.
do?
So I want to just say, thank you both, right? This was, a great informative presentation. Your passion is just amazing and admirable and exciting, right? It's great to see the empathy that you have, the excitement, and I would, I would love to see other judges do this, and as PMC, maybe it's something we look into. So I want to thank
Pennsylvania for modern courts, right?
Right, exactly.
Let's get modern in terms of it, of not, whether we merit select or whether, but how about when the judges are there, what are they doing? Let's
Right.
get modern with that.
We are beyond merit. I mean, we want merit, absolutely, but for appellate court judges. But we have been focusing a lot on the term modern. So that is, this is really enlightening to me. And I want to thank both of you and everybody for coming, because this was a terrific program. So thank you so very much.
And to anybody out there, I mean, one of the key components of what we do is public outreach. That's kind of like my obligation as a treatment court judge. So if there are any community that want to hear about it, that's kind of what my job is. So contact, just Judge ONeill at the Montgomery County Courts. It's easy to do.
And if
Thank
anybody
you.
is interested in watching this video afterwards or forwarding it to any friends or family, it'll be on our pmconline.org.
Right.
Great. All right, have a good night.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me. I appreciate it. Be safe.
Thank you,
David,
David.
thank you so very
you.
much. Bye.